Welcome to the Healing Trauma Podcast, a space for those who are healing from complex and developmental trauma. Introducing your host, Monique Coven, a certified trauma recovery coach, survivor, and thriver. The intent of the podcast is to provide helpful information with insight that can validate, encourage, and support you on your healing journey. You're going to hear stories from other survivors and trauma experts, featuring therapists, coaches, and practitioners. We will open up the conversation on effective trauma healing modalities, practices, and tools. If you are interested in trauma recovery coaching, as well as recommended books and healing resources, head over to www.thehealingtraumapodcast.com. And now, here is your host, Monique Coven.
This episode is sponsored by Tyndale House Publishers. Change your brain every day. 366 days to a better brain, mind, and life. Psychiatrist and clinical neuroscientist Dr. Daniel Amen draws on over 40 years of clinical practice overseeing the treatment of tens of thousands of patients to give you the most effective daily habits he has seen to help you improve your brain, master your mind, and boost your memory, and help you feel happier, healthier, and more connected to those you love. Pre-order is now available at tyndale.com. On today's episode, I'm going to share a conversation I had with Chandra Moyer. And Chandra is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And what's interesting, but not unusual, is that she did not remember her abuse until her early 30s. And she's going to talk about what that experience was like, and how she was later diagnosed with PTSD and dissociative amnesia at the time. And she's going to talk about what that experience was like as she came to terms with realizing that there were different parts of her that held the memories, and how she was able to find healing and is still on the journey of healing. I am going to issue a trigger warning because there is some sensitive content, and if you've had a similar experience, you may not want to listen to this episode. Today, Chandra is a speaker, an author, a life coach, and a veteran Army officer. For 3 decades, she's empowered women through coaching, conferences, and healing retreats. She is the recipient of the FBI Director's Community Leadership Award for child trafficking prevention work. And now, on to the episode. Hi, Chandra. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Monique. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
So, there's so much about your life and about your story that I know personally. I don't know all of it, but I know quite a bit. And I thought you would be a really great person to bring on, and we can talk maybe certain aspects of your story as much as you feel comfortable with sharing. But one of the things I always like to do is have people on where people can get an understanding of what their own experience is like. Often listening to another person, they feel like it makes more sense and they're not alone. So I think you're a great person to have on. You've experienced a lot of different things in your life. And I think one of the things I'm hoping we'll touch on a bit is your experience with how in your 30s, I believe, you started having memories come up, and how things developed from there, things that you really never remembered before. And then what started to happen in your life. And I wanted to share that because I hear this a lot from people, and I want people to know that this does happen and it's not abnormal. In fact, it's often normal when we do get to a place sometimes when we feel some sort of safety, I think. It allows for what has been held sometimes to have the safety of beginning to come up.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting because I was such an overachiever. I was raised in a military family, and basically, gosh, by the time I was in high school, I'd lived in 14 different homes, traveled the world. And so I overachieved in college. I was like the first female cadet corps commander. I was summa cum laude graduate, met my husband there in college, and graduated top of my class. And so, I was very driven. I had goals. I knew where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And so I was basically living my life the way I wanted to. And like you mentioned, when we get in those places of safety, when I was in my 30s, we were living in Hawaii at the time. I mean, beautiful place, paradise. I had 2 children, 6 and 3 at the time, and was getting ready to adopt 2 more children. That was something I always wanted to do, was to adopt children. And so we brought them into our home, and the little girl showed signs of sexual trauma. And I wanted to help her, and I tried to, but that social worker really prevented us, tied our hands, and basically, in a nutshell, instead of helping and to solve the problem, she removed the children. And that removal was such a tragedy for myself and my children. That's what triggered my first flashback. And I think what it was all about is basically feeling helpless. I couldn't do anything. Everything I tried didn't work. And up until that time in my life, I was very much in control. And I always felt like I could do something. So here's the first time I felt helpless, hopeless. So those things I think I felt as a child and re-experiencing as an adult. And so when I had that first flashback, it really took me, gosh, I was really in shock because I went to take a nap, and immediately in a split second, I went back, like I was transported back in time, like a 5-year little girl. And I was in my bedroom. I felt like I was 5 years old in my room, and somebody was coming into my room who was going to do something horrible to me. And I was frozen. In fact, when I came back from that 5-year-old state and wherever I was, and when I came back in my room, I could not move my adult body. I was frozen. And it took some time to thaw out. I call it thawing out, lack of a better term. And I remember going down to my husband, and I said, honey, I think something terrible happened to me as a child, but I can't remember. And I just burst into these sobs. And that really rattled me, because at the time, I was a captain in the Army Reserves. I was raising kids. I was very active in my community. And then this happened.
I'm curious, are you saying that you didn't have any memories of your childhood, or that you thought your childhood was maybe okay before that?
I thought my childhood was perfect. Not just okay. If you had met me back then, I would have said, I came from a wonderful childhood. My husband will tell you this, because this is what I always said to him. And my parents were always supportive of me. And as time went on, he would say to me, I don't see this mother you talk about. She cooked, she did these things, and that's not the woman he saw. And I said, well, that's what she used to be. So I had no memories. The only memories I have of my childhood that I can remember was playing outside, like running in the jungles of the Philippines, playing with my friends outdoors. But as far as inside the house, I don't really have many memories. And one of the things that kind of stunned me, started shifting right before I had my break, was as a parent, parenting was hard for me in the aspect. I had a friend who would tell me stories about her mother, what her mother said to her, what her grandmother said to her, and that helped her with her parenting. And I would try to reach back. Well, what did my mother say to me? And I could not grab anything. So I just read a ton of books on parenting.
And yet you thought, like you told your husband, that you had this great family.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the brain is just amazing, because it was almost like I had created a world to survive. And so that was the first part, that first trigger that I had, and that was probably my first part that surfaced, that little child. And I didn't really do anything other than, at that time, I did go to my family, start asking questions. Like my mother, did anything happen to me as a child? And I didn't allude to the flashback. I didn't tell anybody about the flashback, because I'm still trying to understand that myself. And I just remember asking my mother, did anything unusual, happen in childhood? That's kind of how I phrased it. And she says, well, you were almost kidnapped. Now, I had no memory of that. And that shook me, that I was almost kidnapped. And I always told the story that my sister was almost kidnapped and I rescued her.
Mm.
So when my mother told me that, and I asked her, well, did you ever talk to me about that incident, Mom? And she never did. She never, kind of put me on her lap and said, I'm sorry. The maid handled everything. So I did not pursue anything, because we were getting ready to move out of Hawaii back to the mainland. And life went on. We adopted another little baby. So it would be another 3 years from that initial flashback before I would start having more memories. And when I started having memories, they started flooding. And I finally went to a therapist. I mean, I really resisted going to therapy. That's just something we didn't do. It was not something I saw modeled. It wasn't something that even my friends, and if they did, it was kind of secret. It's not like today.
It wasn't cool then.
It wasn't cool. It's kind of cool today. But I finally did, because my husband was at his wit's end with me, because I was starting to have body memories, like feeling like I was reliving a rape. I was having pains in my body. I was having deep depression. I mean, I couldn't cook Christmas or Thanksgiving meal. We had hot dogs that year. I mean, I was really starting to shut down. My house was looking like that. Oh my goodness, I had 3. Mike was a baby, so I would put him in the playpen. I dropped the other, barely get them off to school, the other 2. Let's see. My oldest was, I want to say, 5th grade. And my daughter was like 2nd grade. And then the baby. And literally, I mean, this sounds awful, but I would put him in the playpen with a bottle, and I would lay on the couch next to him, and I would put it's called Dances with Wolves or something, the old class. It was a 3-hour movie. And he'd sit there and watch. It's terrible. And I would veg. I just messed. And then at times when I got into therapy, I would rock him on the rocking chair, and stuff like that. But I was not there for my children. And so they lost a mommy in the way they needed during that time. And I finally found a therapist. I interviewed 3, and this is the only one that knew about ritual abuse along with sexual abuse. So I hired her, and she is a godsend. She's just like my angel, I call her, because I know today they call IFS, is a big thing. You hear that a lot. Arts work. Right. And we did inner healing, but she was doing parts work then. We didn't call it IFS. But I mean, I remember having an incident. It sounds freaky, right? So I feel this part of me waking up inside, like a little girl. And I literally feel like she's peering out of my eyelids, looking out, so afraid. And my heart's racing. And I mean, it's like my heartbeat changes and everything. And I told my therapist this. I said, I had the weirdest experience. I don't even know how to explain it. And she's, oh, you have a little one waking up. You have a little part. And she would suggest that I would she'd just sit and rock with her and talk to her and let her know that you're there and that it's safe and welcome her. So this little one had so many of the memories. And when I started doing that, I would journal and ask her questions, and she would answer me, and I would write it down. And it was amazing what I unearthed with her. And the confirmation I received, I was molested from, I say 14 months, I'll say 2 to 16. And it's amazing because my aunt gave me some information. She says, because I told her, I said, I'm having memories of being sexually abused. And she says, well, I have one thing I want to share with you. When you were really young, you were about 14 months old, your mother told me how you would scream and cry when your dad would come into the room. And you would shake, and she would have to literally pick you up and remove you from him out of another room. And my dad had been gone for the first 14 months of my life, military assignment. And when he came back, that's when it all started. And so when my mother told me that, and then my aunt told me, after all these years, she says, that confirmed to me, that's how young I was. Because that's not normal behavior. And my mother would always say, well, you reacted that way because you're always too sensitive. And, you weren't used to a male voice. But my children, when I started having children and my husband would go away and come back when they were young, none of them reacted that way. Mm-hmm. So just those type of signs like that was confirmation for me that I was very, very young when it started.
So when you talk about having this younger part and then developing a relationship with her, would you say that that's kind of, I know there's like a spectrum and different degrees, but would you say that was a dissociative part?
I would say so, because I didn't know she existed.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it.
And dissociation, from what my reading, it's a spectrum, right? Like you say. And not only, I would say definitely a dissociative part, but also, like I know in one of my sessions, when things would get really hard, I'd have another part come in, a defender. Like I was really beginning to see some things that was happening. And immediately this other part came in to prevent me from seeing and feeling and all that. And when my therapist asked, I said, she says, where are you? I said, I don't know, because we went from the throes of being terrorized, and then I'm quiet, and it's like, where are you? And I'm like, and this other part came up with a different voice, with a deeper voice, as a defender. And she asked him, would you step aside so I could really see? And he was very uncomfortable, but he did. And that's why I was able to really see what was happening to me. And I would relive that was a deep session, and that my body would relive certain things as I'd go through it. And it's interesting because I never revisited with Defender because I did so much work with little one. Mm-hmm. And he has just surfaced again recently I've just started therapy again a few months ago because I've had some new parts awaken, because my dad is old now and he's dying. And it's almost like some of these parts really feeling safe to come forward. It's really interesting.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds it. And I think it's good that you had that therapy to be able to understand what is happening. I've heard from people say to me that they didn't even know that they had parts, or that there were these parts that took over. They would and then it just started to make sense.
Yeah, because I felt crazy. I really feel like I was going crazy with all of this. And my therapist was telling me, no, you're not crazy. These parts helped protected you. These were your coping mechanisms. That's why you could function the way you functioned all these years. And, you start becoming grateful for these parts that helped you survive. I compartmentalized different things. And you become grateful. Like, I'm thinking if I didn't have that, I was probably be on drugs. I probably would have been institutionalized, something other than how my life has gone.
I wanted to share a brand new offering that I've added, which is a chance to meet with me one-on-one in a rather informal manner, where we meet virtually on Zoom for 45 minutes, and you can bring your questions, your concerns. Maybe you want to talk about your healing journey, and this is done in a confidential and safe space. To find out more about all my offerings, you can visit my website at thehealingtraumapodcast.com. One of the interesting things that I've heard from so many people who have had memories come up later in life, like yourself, is they always describe their family as being, oh no, I had the perfect family. Yeah, not that it was okay, but that it was like great.
It's like over extreme, right? It's like, can't be just okay. And then the irony of that whole thing, I would just tell my husband how dysfunctional his family was the whole time. And I tell him how wonderful my family was. Gosh, it's terrible. Poor guy. So he went through it too. He saw this strong woman. And then he saw this woman unraveling. And a couple times he saw the little child. I remember my therapist said, what would your husband say? Or what would he do if he saw you as in the state of a little child? And I said, I don't really know. She says, well, tell him not to try to fix you, or, just to remind you that you're safe. And if it's too much, just call me. That's what she said. So most of my incidents, when I'd have him, he wasn't around, or the kids weren't around. I was able to kind of get along and do it. But one particular day, I just had a memory of my sister being molested by my dad. And she had come to visit. And the only kind of confirmation with my other siblings was my sister, when I was having I call it, I don't want to say breakdown, but that's what I used to call it, the breakdown years ago, right? When I was unraveling, my sister really wanted to come see me. I'm the oldest one of the girls, and so I'm like 12 years older than her. I didn't want her to see me in that vulnerable state because I was the strong one. And she pressed. She said, I really want to come. And so she came and she told me she was also having, she's seeing a therapist, and she's thinking she was sexually abused, but she didn't know by who. And it was like the day or two before she left, I had a dream memory. And in the memory, I saw my dad molesting her, and I was trying to stop him. And I didn't tell her about that because if you remember, Monique, back then, we're talking about early 90s, that false memory syndrome was huge. So as survivors, we were not only trying to come to terms with what was going on inside, these memories that were coming, but then we had to hear from the false memory syndrome people saying that these aren't real memories. And then the abuser, which was my dad, was saying, oh, that's not true, it's false memory. So, the perpetrator was using that as a weapon against victims and survivors, right? So, but I really had a meltdown after my sister left. And I could feel it as time went on. I could almost feel like when a part was coming up, or when I was getting ready to unburden something, when something was getting ready to explode or release, and I could feel it. And this was the first time my kids were home. And I went to my oldest son and I said, hey, Mommy's not feeling really well right now. I said, I'm going to go in the room and you'll probably hear me crying. I said, but Mommy's okay. Mommy's going to be okay. And so I went and I regressed to a young child. And I went for about an hour reliving that. And my husband came in the middle of that. And I went another hour. And he watched that whole thing. Oh my goodness. And that freaked him out, because I remember after but I have to say, it's awful going through it. But when you go through it and you release it, and it feels so good. I mean, it just feels like this weight is gone, right? And so he was rocking in front of the TV, and I said, how are you doing? He says, I just don't know who you are. He says, I saw, are you going to be the woman I married? Are you, I saw a little girl today. I just don't know who you're going to be, And I told him, I don't really know who I'm going to be, but I don't want to be who I was, because wasn't all of me.
Right.
And I said, I'll just have to trust God when this is all over, that I'll be who I was always intended to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be more whole. Right. So he has a running joke now. He says that he's married to wife number 3. And this is why I'm the best of all 3.
Wow. It must have been really, really, I mean, it's true. We often think about the survivor's experience when parts show up, but what about the families, how that impacts them and rocks their world.
That's the world. Yeah.
Wow. And it's interesting how you say that you're noticing even now in present, because you've been on this journey a long time, how some parts are coming back and you're finding some new parts.
Yes. My life has been going great these years, 20, 30 years. I mean, I started this like 30 years ago. I can't believe it's been this long. And it's not like I'm working. I had very intense years, like 5 years that were very intense. And up until now, it's just been really pretty quiet and everything. But I had an incident that happened a couple of years ago that was very hurtful, and it was a betrayal incident. And so that activated a cussing part. I mean, I'm just going to be honest.
A cussing part?
A cussing part. I mean, I was cussing up a storm. I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And it didn't matter who I met in the grocery store.
It's good we could laugh.
I know,
especially like that's not typically what you're like.
Yeah, right. And so and I was just so angry and so mad, and and I know anger is a part of a defense thing, to buffer the hurt, right? So I just couldn't realize I was kind of stuck in a way, and it subsided, but it would come back really quickly again. And so I finally, I've been listening to podcasts because someone says, do you know about IFS? And I really didn't know 2 years ago about IFS. I mean, I did, but I didn't, if that makes sense. And I've lived through some of that, but just didn't have the correct terminology today. And so I started asking. I was like, I wonder if I have any other parts. I did that work back then, and I had a dream where a part woke up in my dream. I was in the middle of an sexual act, and the part woke up and I didn't know where I was, who I was with, or anything. And so that showed me I had another part that needed healing, plus this other one. So it's been amazing. These last couple of sessions, I had a devastated part, which was very connected to the betrayal. Because anytime I would get betrayed or something, I'd just be devastated. And so recently I just unburdened that part. That was amazing that she'd carried so much of that. And then Defender is, and I was amazed when he came. I'm like, I remember you 30 years ago. So I started engaging with him. I hadn't really done that. And he's about ready to give up his job. And after he saw what happened to the devastated one, how she gave up her, and he's like, I want some of that. He wants to. So it's been, this journey recently has been amazing.
Yeah, I think you're such a good example of how healing is not, one and done. Like sometimes something can come up again, and there's a new piece that wants to be processed at the right time.
Yeah. And I think it's just like layered, right? It's not one and done. And I think also I was thinking about just the changes of life. When you go through my family, I'm still the only one who's really come forward, right? So I've done this journey alone without my family origin. And I think that when you are uh, alone. And when you have weddings, big events in the family, like weddings or funerals, that can bring up some new things. Like my mother passed last year, my sister passed last year. I did not attend my mother's funeral because I had disengaged from her for my own well-being. And I saw how my family, my siblings were operating around the perpetrator. And it was not safe for me to be in that environment. And I'm strong enough now and healthy enough, I can do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think when we have these milestones, Mark, it can bring up other things. And so I'm just realizing now why some of the parts did not, because as long as they felt like he had the power or he could come back and hurt, it was a little hesitancy. But, it's been interesting just to see this other layer of healing coming. I'm past 65 now, it's just like, I feel like it's just really a lifelong journey. I don't want to scare people away because it's not like this, it's just going to be horrible the whole time. I tell people that are just starting out, because it is horrible at the beginning. You're just hurting so much and crying oceans of tears. I said, but it's not. If you work through it, you find joy, you find peace, you find fulfillment, so it's not like your whole life is going to be this way at the time that you're feeling it. You feel like it's going to be forever, honestly, though you do, but it's not. It's not going to be forever. And then I go through this and it's like it's over. It's kind of like it's not a long 3-day ordeal or something now. The processing is much quicker than what it was way back then.
You're saying a really, really important part, because I think that that is one of the ways that we start to notice that we have healed or we're healing, is that a lot of times we would be in that for a whole day, or days, like you said. And then you start to notice that as you're healing that, okay, so maybe an hour or a half an hour, and then you're able to bring yourself back to a feeling of groundedness or safety. And that's huge.
It is huge, because it would be days that I would be in, and after a trigger or a flashback, it would just seem like forever to get through it. And so there is, you just, you realize, wow, I have come a long way, and I want to just encourage your listeners too. Like my husband and I are the best that we've been as far as in our marriage and everything healthy wise. And it's been a gift from my children that I have done this work for the next generation. They're still they do their own work, but by me facing this and protecting my children from being sexually abused by my dad, because no memories, he would have had access to them. So, some of these hard choices that we make is it's healthy for us and healthy for our children and grandchildren to come.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. I also love what you said about, you were saying when you were at, I think, the funeral, that you just noticed that you were able to make choices and boundaries and that. And I think that also comes with healing, that you start to see that you do have agency, that you can have power to say, you know what, no, I'm not going to go, or I'm going to go for a half an hour instead of feeling I have no choice. I have to go for the whole time.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's really, really great.
Amazing. Yeah.
Before we end, I remember talking with you and you wanted to share about one of the most difficult parts that you realized was the most painful, was in terms of what happened to you, was about your mom. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I had faced parts of the sexual abuse, ritual abuse, and then my therapist had always asked me, "Where's your mom?" I was quick to say, "My mom's not there. She didn't know anything about it," but my mother did, and I would kind of embrace it to some degree, but I still didn't accept that she really knew. And so I had a dream memory. A lot of my memories came in the form of dreams, sometimes when I was awake, but sometimes in dream. And in this memory, my mother walked into the bathroom. That's where a lot of abuse happened. And my dad was violating me. I was young. I mean, maybe 6. And my mother walks in and I catch her eye. She seems shocked, but then she looks at me and turns away, but not before I saw in her eyes. I saw hatred, blame, and disgust. And she turned around, closed the door, and left me in there. And I was devastated. I remember just crying in the dream. And I woke up and I was beginning to spiral. And I had done a lot of work at this point. We had moved. And I was sinking fast. I felt like I was going right back in the depths. And I called a friend and asked her, because I was sitting at a crossroad. I was in the car and I wanted to kill myself. The pain was so excruciating. I had faced the sexual ritual abuse, and now I'm facing the abandonment of my mother that she really knew. And the pain was just taking me out. And I remember sitting in an intersection, and I thought I could just end it now. I wanted to kill myself. I didn't want to live. And I had not had that before, and everything, the suicidal thing. And I remember putting my foot on the accelerator. I was getting ready to just accelerate. It was a busy intersection. And I don't know to this day what really held me back. And the thought of my kids was one thing. And after that, I called a friend to help me process that. That was agonizing for me, the process. And I think it's because our mothers are our lifeline. I mean, that's where we get our life from. And that was everything I went through was horrible, but I have to say that was probably the most excruciating, painful for me, to face the truth that my mother knew and turned her back on me.
And do you think that, have you ever confronted her about knowing or thinking that, like asking her about this? And
yes, I did that in the early 90s. I'd ask her if she initially said she didn't know, but then I would have a dream memory. That's why I was grateful for the confirmations, because I said, well, I saw Dad coming in the bathroom. And I said, did he come in the bathroom when I was a teenager, when I was a kid? She said, yeah, he did many times. So she'd say that. And then I said, well, Mom, then I'd go to the next step and say, well, he was touching my breast. And I'll never forget when she responded, well, your dad, he has a hard time showing his affection. Maybe that was him jokingly showing you affection. And I was shocked that came out of my mother's mouth. And I said to her, no, Mom, that's no way a father shows affection to that. Is sexual abuse. And she would go in and out. Like, she'd give me a little bit and then she'd go back into denial. Then she'd give me a little bit and go back into denial. That's how it was when I was facing my memory. So she admitted to degree, but never did I hear, I'm so sorry that happened to you, till later on. But I think I would venture to say my mother was, I'm not making excuses, but I would say she was probably traumatized herself and probably has some history of that as well. Because that's not a normal behavior for a mother when you see your child being harmed, that you could just check out.
Yeah, sadly, that's not the first time I heard something like that.
Yeah, me neither. I've talked to some other people.
But, one of the things I was struck was at how, like, your 6-year-old self, even though no words were spoken, you were able to verbalize disgust, hate, all those things. And that's what really affected you was that.
Yes. Yeah. Just the look out of the eyes, right? The eyes are the window of the soul, right? And so just that, you don't need words all the time, do you?
And also when we are in such distress or trauma, we naturally have this response of reaching out for another, like to attach. And of course, who do we want to attach to is our moms. And to think that, no, instead of that, you get like a look of hate and then walking out and not helping. That has to be devastating. So I feel for you, and it makes so much sense how you must have felt.
Yeah. And so I'm grateful for that, just releasing the devastated part just recently, last month. She had a lot to unburden. And I tell you, after that session, I slept for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah. So my husband is so funny. He says, "What part am I talking to you today?" I said, "Oh, honey, you have parts too." He says, "But I don't want mine to wake up."
You know what?
The male ego.
And, in reality, we really do all have parts. When we do find ourselves getting triggered and we start to feel really young, and, we might even act a bit childlike, that's a part,
Yes.
And it makes sense. I like what Dick Schwartz says, and with the IFS, that, we are not just as one being. We have different aspects of ourselves, the one that wants to go have fun with friends, and another one that would rather just veg out in front of the TV, or, like different parts. Yep. So, yeah.
That's so true. That's so true.
Well, I thank you so much for sharing with us today. Is there one last thing you feel you want to say just before we close? Don't want to put you on the spot, but if there is.
Well, I just think I wish I had something like this when I was going through. We didn't have the access to resources and podcasts. And I just want to encourage those who are listening, especially the ones that are starting out on the journey, that, it's a brave thing that they're doing, and it's worth it, and that they're not alone.
Thank you. They are not alone. Thank you.